The Motor Dream podcast is recorded on Wallamedigal land of the Eora Nation. It always was and always will be the lands of the First Nations of Australia.
This is the Motor Dream podcast.
Hello again and welcome to the Motor Dream podcast. Connor McNally with you, and this is episode 20 of the podcast where we can dream just a little about what our dream garage would be if money was no issue whatsoever. By now, if you're a regular listener, you would know that we try and get motoring enthusiasts from all walks of life onto the show and find out what their dream garage would be if they became instant billionaires in a blink of an eye. In this episode, we're lucky to welcome a fairly prominent media personality who also happens to be a proud motoring enthusiast. And to let you ponder on who that might be, I can say straight up that it's not John Laws or even Brendan Jonesy Jones. But they would be great guests that I'd love to have on the show one day, maybe. So if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you know what I'm about to say. For all the new listeners, welcome aboard, and here's how it goes. I tell my guests that one day they wake up and they check their phones and they discover that they receive a text to say that they need to check their bank balance. They then open up the bank app and suddenly discover that their balance has gone to infinity. They are instant billionaires. As soon as they discover their newfound fortune, they get an email from this mystery benefactor that tells them that they can spend anything that they like and they can buy any car, bike or machine that they want. There is a catch though. They are only allowed 3 cars, bikes or machines in their dream garage. It sounds easy in theory, but as my previous guests have discovered, it is very, very hard to decide. And in this episode of the podcast, my guest has been a regular mainstay of the talkback radio genre for more than 3 decades. And he created Australian radio history in the early 1990s by becoming the youngest person to host a talk show on a metropolitan AM station, that station being 2UE in Sydney. Known by many of his loyal listeners as the Spoon Man from his time hosting his late-night talk show on the Triple M network for much of the 2000s, Brian Carlton is what you'd call an accidental radio star, which is someone who is very good at his talent, but he isn't one to crave for the limelight like some of his more prominent contemporaries, and that's how he likes it. Growing up on the northern beaches of Sydney, the two subcultures of surfing and cars were the perfect mix for men of Carlton's generation to fall in love with. And as much as he loved the surf lifestyle, Carlton's real calling was with cars, and in many ways, he was quite the rebel when it came to his choices of machinery, which involved a lot of arguments with a lot of his friends at the time. Even when his prominence grew as a radio personality for much of the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Carlton never really saw for anything flashy like his fellow radio revheads wanted, which included John Laws, Mike Carlton and the late Doug Mulray. You see, Brian Carlton was more the practical type of car owner, and he was not afraid to go against the grain of car ownership that you would find in your typical Ford versus Holden heartland. Brian remains passionate about cars to this very day, and even now in his current role as a presenter for 2CC in Canberra, he's not afraid to speak his mind about the current state of the motoring industry in this country. He is also a very humble human being, and as a fan of his work, I was delighted when he said yes to come onto the show. This interview was recorded in the second half of last year, and it's one that I'm sure you'll enjoy. So without further ado, it's a pleasure to welcome the Spoon Man, aka Brian Carlton, to the Motor Dream podcast. Brian Carlton, aka the Spoon Man, thank you for joining me on the Motor Dream podcast. It's great to have you on.
Lovely to be with you, Connor. It's always fun to talk about your favourite things.
It is certainly exciting to talk about cars, which you actually have a huge passion for, because I remember one of your monologues that you did during your first stint at Triple M in Sydney was you talked about Bathurst, because back in 2012 was the 50th anniversary and you were excited about the great race happening, you know, the celebration of the history of the race and of course supercars. It really pricked up my interest to see that you actually love cars.
Yeah, I love cars as long as I was able to stand up on the back seat of my dad's old EH station wagon. and peer out the window and watch all the other cars going past much, much faster. So, yeah, I don't know where it came from. I just have this incredible love of these little things. So this was a car back in my day. That's a Hot Wheels car
Cool.
from back in the 60s. And when you've got stuff floating around like that, here's another one. This is what cars were going to look like in the future. It was incredibly exciting. And cars had obviously given everybody this freedom of movement, the ability to get around. I mean, it was only a century and a half ago that the average human lived their entire life within 10 kilometres of where they were born. And the motor car has just been this incredible freedom machine for much of the human population for the past half century and beyond. And I just think it's one of the greatest things ever, and we should be encouraging their use, not trying to get people onto trains and things.
You don't have any argument with me because I love driving and I have a very similar upbringing to you. I annoyed my parents when I see cars driving around and say, oh, that's a Commodore or that's a Falcon. And then I had the little Matchbox cars. In fact, I still have my Matchbox cars that are sitting in my garage right now. So they're in boxes and they're properly stored away. So I'll probably at one point bring them out and, maybe put them in a cabinet or something. But it's that passion. As soon as you fall in love with something like a car, you never really get rid of that addiction. It's not a sickness, but it's a cool thing to have.
It is unusual though, because it's a love you develop for something before you actually have an opportunity to do it yourself. And I love cars long before I could ever drive one. And I was fortunate in having a father who threw a set of keys at me one day when we were out in the sticks to his Subaru station wagon, mid-1970s, sort of the first iteration of Subaru four-wheel drives. And he said, I'm going for a sleep, don't want to hear any gear gnashing. And left me alone
Nice.
to drive around the homestead as a 12-year-old. So that was sort of my first driving lesson. And from that moment, it turbocharged, if you'll pardon the pun, my love of driving to the point where doing this is so much better than sitting on the seat at the back or sitting on the seat at the side. Actually doing it is epic. There's this connection with the machine, with a purpose. You are going somewhere to do something. But it doesn't mean that little stretch of your life has to be boring and dull. And we'll get onto that a little bit later because it's part of the theme of my three cars for you.
I agree, and I'm looking forward to discussing that. You grew up on the northern beaches of Sydney, and when I picture the northern beaches of Sydney, other than being Manly territory, Sea Eagles territory, I think of a surf culture, and I also think of a car culture, and they intertwine so brilliantly. And it's something that maybe it's kind of not the same now, but back in the time you grew up, it was very much a strong connection between the two.
Let me tell you a story that might exemplify why you're so right. There was a guy who used to hang around DY, North Narrabeen, Curl beaches, who drove a Sandman, a Sandman panel van,
Yes.
right, a Holden thing. It was a serious bit of kit. All the swirls on the side of it and the big shiny rims and all of that. On the roof were a couple of surfboards. And on closer inspection, when you got right up and had a look at it, you realised that they were bolted there.
I've heard about this.
It's true. He was doing it for the look. He was doing it for the scene. The guy had never been on a surfboard in his life, but it was pretty obvious what he was down there to do with his paddle van, and it had not a lot to do with going up and down on the waves. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. My mates used to drive around in almost exclusively V8s. One of them went on, so I won't name him, but went on to be a driver trainer for the New South Wales Police. Another one, sadly, not with us anymore. But all these guys drove V8 utes. They drove, when I say V8s, I'm talking about Ford GT351s, the old 351 ute version and sedan version. They had super duper cars, all V8s, and it was a real thing. Yeah, all had roof racks, all had surfboards. Most of them used their surfboards. But the great thing about a V8 was you could big car, you could pile a bunch of your mates into it and all hit the beach. There'd be 6 surfboards on the roof, from the genuine ones. But yes, Stead said, car culture and surf culture, just like that, absolutely intertwined on the beaches.
Did you get involved in that kind of culture? Obviously, you had that love of cars, but did you get involved with the surf side of things at that same time?
You might have noticed over the years, Connor, that I'm a bit of a prickly guy and I don't necessarily go with the prevailing trend.
Yes.
I used to have monumental arguments with my mates about what the future of cars were. And they go, oh, mate, the V8 will live forever. And I'm going, gosh, I'm really sorry, guys. I'm not sure it's going to work out that way. And when you do, even back in those days, comparing, say, a Turbo 4, which were just starting to come on. You know, you've got the Saab 900 Turbo,
Yes.
which was around the big turbo thing on the side. You couldn't miss it. And the sound the thing made as it went past. I eventually bought cars. I had mostly hatchbacks. And they were brutalised by my friends vigorously, and I loved it. Right, we'd have huge arguments about front-wheel drive versus rear-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive versus turbo versus non-turbo V8. You know, and it had to be a V8 rear-wheel drive, Holden or a Ford, and that was almost a religion. So the reason what you're saying resonates with me so much is I was up against that, if you like. Although I love V8s, I have nothing inherently against V8s.
Yeah.
It was just pretty obvious that they were at the beginning of the on the way out stage, and it was just a matter of time, how long. I used to enjoy the arguments. I loved it. And the odd time when I was taking a small turbo and out with the guys, right, on a road trip or down the snow or whatever, they realised that there was something in what I was saying because I was able to keep up with them. Not that we were breaking the law or the speed limit or anything at any time, but there was one trip when the nice people at Volvo had given me a 740 turbo.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
For a weekend, a black thing. It was glorious.
It was big and long, too. This is like before they actually became cool.
Correct. And it was a stunning vehicle, genuinely. Anyway, they after we got down to the snow, was all right, okay, it's not a bad car at all. It's pretty good, you know, which was high praise from the V8 guys.
That's pretty cool. It's funny how we look at cars now and you don't see too many V8s around these days. Yes, there's still V8s around. You've got your Camaros, you've got your Mustangs, and the like. Even BMWs have got V8s, Audis as well. But there's a lot more cars now that are either electric, they're hybrids, or they're four cylinders. And a lot of them are like four cylinders now. People, can't afford these days to own a V8. So do you feel justified in your argument now, particularly with those people that you had those arguments then? Do you say to them now, I told you so?
You don't have to. It's so painfully obvious, the car trends over the past couple of decades, that you really don't need to rub it in. When you can go and buy just plucking one out of the air here, a 2.5 litre turbocharged Porsche 4-cylinder, with 260 odd kilowatts and God knows how many newton meters of torque. Why would you use a V8? Why would you put a V8 in that?
Yeah, that's true.
You don't need to. It's a little bit of overkill. And plus, we live in nanny states on the roads these days. The road speed limits have not increased, if anything, decreased. In fact, have decreased since I was a kid. But the technology of cars has gone through the roof. The tyres are so much better. Hell, I used to drive on cross-ply tyres. You remember?
Yes,
don't go around the corner too fast. You'll rip the rims off the cross-ply. Rip the cross-ply off the rims. And, it was very basic driving. When you drove at 100 kilometres an hour, you were driving flat out. These days, 100 kilometres an hour is a doddle in a modern car. And again, that's one of the things I find a bit boring about the new cars. But it was going to be all about efficiency, and it was going to be all about practicality as more and more people bought cars. Very few homes these days just have one car.
Yes, I agree with that. And in my case, myself and my partner, we've got our own car individually, and when we need to get out somewhere, we will either go together in one car or we'll go in two cars. It just makes it so much easier now to get around because the accessibility of cars is so much more readily available than what it used to be.
Yeah, that's right. And when efficiency is now a byword of motor vehicles, that's one of the first things that people look at when they go and buy a car. How much petrol does it use? And that was not something we ever bothered about back in the day when petrol was, 30 cents a litre.
I'm old enough to remember that. So
you didn't worry about it. It just wasn't a thing. And now it is a massive thing, and that's why the electric cars are obviously becoming so popular because you can, zero petrol bill and I can charge it up at home. Yeah, okay. It is no doubt the way cars will go in the future, but we will lose something in the process. Like you used to hear people back in the horse and carriage day, oh, there's nothing like, sitting behind a horse and, trundling along a country road in the sunshine. You're going to miss all that with a car because they're all closed in. There was a lot of that, but we accepted it. And I think the future generations, they won't have had the experiences that we've had growing up, crawling around under engines and dismantling cars to fix things and putting it back together again. They won't have lived that, so it won't be anything they viscerally miss like we will when it goes.
I want to touch on your career. You obviously established you had that passion for cars from a very young age, but you obviously got into the media and you became quite successful. You became one of the youngest primetime presenters, and you worked with the likes of 2GB, 2UE, and eventually Triple M for many years. Did that open the door for you to experience, I guess the fruits of your labour from your work, to get the cars that you really wanted to own in that time, or were you just happy to be more modest in your choice?
This will be something that's painfully clear later when I talk to you about my three.
Yes,
but I've never been one for personal extravagance. It's when you've been a public figure since the age of 27.
Yeah.
To be fair, the early part of that was fine because there was no internet, there was no pictures. You could do radio, and people didn't recognise you. You could walk down the street without anybody knowing who you were. Since the advent of the internet and the videoification of radio,
yes,
it became, plus, you say in Hobart, for example, and in Tasmania, where I've been recently, there's massive billboard posters all over the place with your face on it. And it's like you tend to try not to attract too much attention to yourself otherwise. So
yeah.
I love nice things, but I find extravagance for the sake of extravagance at any time a little bit obscene.
It's funny you say that, because it seems to me when you're a successful radio personality, controversy and I guess the fruits of your labour go hand in hand. We see the likes of John Laws and Mike Carlton and even the late Doug Morrow, for example. Those two things sort of collated together so nicely, and through that controversy that they had throughout their career, they had their love of cars and they had their successes, and they were not afraid to show them off. Or in Mike's case, I know he had a penchant for Jaguars, but when you look at the late Doug Morrow, he had a huge love of Jaguars, loved cars, and then John Laws, of course, well, speaks for itself. He was massively obsessed with cars. He even had a Porsche at one point. So, it's sort of like goes hand in hand. So it's very interesting to hear, that doesn't really interest you in that way.
Yeah, it's a conundrum, I admit, and it has been a possibly impossible balancing act over the years.
Yeah.
If you want to be very successful and very wealthy in the media, there is a point, and I'll sort of exclude Doug from this, Doug Mulray, because his, and to an extent Laws as well, because the era in which they were controversial, they were allowed to be controversial.
Yeah.
It was encouraged for them to be controversial back in the days when Australia still valued larrikinism and sticking it to the man and all that kind of thing, when that was still a thing here. So they had a chance to establish themselves in a period where being outrageous was rewarded rather than, in some cases now, punished. However, it means you have to give a fair bit of yourself away to do all that publicly. You have to expose yourself, if you like, to public judgment about things other than your work. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And I always found that really uncomfortable. And, back in the day, you'd get invited to the opening of an envelope, and I very rarely went to any openings. I've never had a manager. I've never had a publicist. I've not really been particularly interested in making a star or a celebrity of myself. Because I find it all hugely uncomfortable. Now that's probably a bit of, undiagnosed ADHD. I don't know what it is, but when so much of what you think and feel and believe is in the public domain, it's nice to have some stuff that's not. And I like to keep my private life private just because it's private. It's nobody else's business but mine. But, they made a great deal of money, those guys, a huge amount of money with minimal compromise. The point I was going to make is if you want to be a big star now, if you want to be a celebrity, if you want to earn bucket loads of money in the media, you have to give yourself away. And I'm not prepared to do that.
I see your point, and it's a very valid point as well, because it's easy for people to become a celebrity now, particularly in this day and age where there's so much videoification, I guess you could say, and also the internet. It's very easy to become a celebrity, but it's also easy to lose that celebrity status if you get yourself into too much trouble, and that's something I think you don't want to do either.
One of the hardest things about being a public figure in the media, where your job is to cast forth your opinion on things, is you can either do it easily and cheaply with throwaway nonsense and mislead and deceive the audience, or you can spend the time, find out what the hell it is you're about to talk about before you start talking about it. And that takes time and takes a good deal of effort, and it means you often can't go to the celebrity parties or the opening of the latest movie or theatre production because you're actually working. And in the radio I've done, I've not had 10 producers. You've got to go do the work yourself, or it just doesn't happen properly. And I have always, understood the privilege of that job and the responsibility that goes with that privilege, and the idea of getting out there in any way misleading Australians, my audience, the people, about anything is abhorrent to me. It keeps me up at night.
During your time in radio, did you ever get the opportunity where like car manufacturers might offer you to say have a free car or something, or was that just something that really wasn't interested?
It happened. No, it happened a couple of times. The aforementioned Volvo. That was a good 25 years ago now, a long time ago. In fact, longer than that. Well, 30 years ago. Let's not talk. The only other time was when the people at Hyundai were doing the Genesis Round 1. And
yes.
They lent the radio show I was working on at 2UE1 for a couple of days to use to do the very first mobile OB through various parts of Sydney from the back of a car. The entire drive show was done from the back of a car using a Comrex, which is a bit of equipment you'll know, but not everyone will. We got to do it in the back of a limo, effectively, which was fabulous. But look, no, they don't really do that anymore these days, unless you're a specific motoring journalist, which, the job I would love to have done while doing all these radio years would have been a motoring journo. It's a bit like, if you're familiar with Doug Mulray, and he has that wonderful gag where he's this fabulously successful radio personality and celebrity, and all he really wanted to do was be a dry cleaner. Yeah. Okay. For me, the dry cleaner is
being a motoring journalist.
Is being a motoring journalist.
Yeah.
I can't think of a better job. I used to watch some of the early eps of Top Gear when it first started. And I'd kick back at the end of every episode and go, is there a better job on the planet than that? Tell me what it is. I don't know what it is, but that's the best.
I guess if you had your way and you were to host Top Gear Australia, if it ever came back, you would put your hand up straight away and say yes.
Oh, absolutely, and I'd be worse than Jeremy Clark.
Yes, I can see that happening, actually. Actually, I want to ask you, what did you think of the Australian version when it came out? And no disrespect to those that worked on the show, because they did a fantastic job, but when you looked at it at the time, it just didn't feel like it was a Top Gear show. And as I said, I'm not knocking the hosts at the time, Charlie Cox, Steve Pizzardi, and of course Shane Jacobs. They all did a fantastic job, but it just didn't have that same kind of magic as the British version.
No, I did a hot lap with Pizzardi and a Mercedes E63 AMG at Oran Park for the launch of the Top Gear Australia. scared the willies out of me. Unbelievable. But you're right. Look, the thing about Top Gear that made that show work had not a lot to do with cars. It had a lot to do with the chemistry that those three guys had. Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May. The three of them together could have done a show about knitting or hey, let's go boating every weekend. And it would have been just as funny as Top Gear was, just as engaging. In my view, that's one of the highlights of television in the new millennium is Top Gear. The cinematography was astonishing. The outrageousness, the blatant outrageousness of it. Yes. And just, you could, as a viewer, I mean, look, possibly not as well with female viewers, but as a guy, you can relate going out and doing that kind of stuff with your mates. You just can. So, look, you're right about the Australian Top Gear version. The guys are really good. They were really lovely blokes. They're very talented guys,
they are,
individually. And they gave it a red hot go. But I think the network here in Australia misunderstood what the actual appeal of this program was. And it wasn't the cars and it wasn't the brand, it was the guys. And if you ain't got those guys, it's not going to work as well.
During your media career, you've not only worked in radio, but you've also worked in television. And as I've discovered, your real passion for motorsport lies with Formula One. So during that time, you've actually worked covering Formula One during the original time with Channel 9. And that really got you interested in motorsport as a whole, didn't it?
Yeah, no, I never really worked on Formula One. I was always just a fan. But the sport itself is, to me, it's the absolute pointy end of something I genuinely love. And when you go, here's a car, what can we do with it to make it go as fast as we can make it go without it hitting the wall? And the F1's just the pinnacle of that. It's I was watching a qualifying the other day, and I think it was the first 17 places all finished within 1 second of each other.
Crazy, isn't it?
Now, there's I can't think of another sport with the possible exception of elite swimming where you get down to hundredths of a second in an event that takes so long. In fact, you can exclude elite swimming from that because the gaps in any sort of long distance swimming are always longer than a micro fraction of a second. So it's the competitive nature of it, the money, the colour, the noise, all the stuff. For me, is it's almost a fantasy area, a fantasy realm.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think we need to keep pushing the technology, whatever it is you're doing. If you're making sewing machines, make the best sewing machine you possibly can that does the best possible job. Let's see how it goes. Cars are no different. Do
you think we're in a good era right now with the current regulations of Formula One, or do you think the ones that we had prior to the change, where we saw that controversy in 2021, do you think that was the best era, or do you think we're in the cusp of a good era right now?
Oh, look, I was one of the young people who'd sit up way past normal bedtime on a Sunday night and watch Ayrton Senna get around. And it's hard to imagine how there'll be a day that was more exciting than that. When you go back and watch some of those 80s or early 90s Grand Prix.
I'm the same. I did the same. Stayed up well past my bedtime and to the eye of my parents and watched those Grand Prix. Yeah, they were beautiful times.
It's so formative that everything you have seen since you judge against that standard. And look, there's no doubt the modern cars are faster. The drivers are extraordinary. I mean, Verstappen, Hamilton, just amazing talent, no doubt about it. But there was just something. It was almost the danger of it back in the day.
Yeah.
You go back and watch some of the early Senna Grand Prix, and the Australian car gets left on the side of the track, and the idea is the drivers have to go around it or understand that it's there and not hit the damn thing. As opposed to safety cars for 17 laps while we get the car off the track. And I know it was the danger of it. And I think the perception of danger of it. I think if Formula One's lost anything, and I don't say this with any desire to see Formula One drivers pasted against walls dead by any stretch of the imagination, but the emphasis on safety has pulled some of the excitement back a bit. Just my view.
Yeah.
But I say it as a 40-year plus veteran of watching F1. Yeah.
What about the Americanization of like the drive to survive factor? Do you think that's maybe played a part in that?
F1 had to expand its franchise beyond where it had been. And to get into the US market is something that every European sport desires to do if they possibly could. And when the opportunity arose to for the sport, I guess, to get that injection of US interest, of capital. Obviously, the documentary had a massive influence on swinging people around to this sport that they might have only just been slightly aware of, over the course of their life.
Oh, it did great things.
NASCAR, Indy racing. I mean, look, if it's asked me again in 20 years, it's one of those you don't really know.
Yeah.
I am a bit of a purist. I'm not a fan of things like DRS. I'm not a fan of the hybridized engines. I think the whole braking and recovery, energy recovery systems and all that, it gives the cars a bit more grunt. I understand that when they need it, but it lacks a purity of racing that I think a lot of F1 fans who have been fans for a long time kind of miss. The idea that somebody is out of a race because their battery overheats or, it's like, come on, really? Can we have it a bit cleaner than that? A bit, if it is F1 and there is an E series, let them knock themselves out with the electric engines. Terrific, no drama. But I really do think the F1 should just be internal combustion engines, full stop. If they need to reinvent the whole thing, merge it with E at some point down the track, 20 years' time, they might need to do that. But they're going to have to make the E-racing a lot more exciting than it has been so far.
It has been quite lackluster, I have to say. It's kind of not been as enticing as it once originally was. Because I remember when Formula E came out, it actually provided some good racing, but I found it rather bizarre that you had to have two cars. So at first part of the race, you come into the pits, jump out of that car, get into the next car, and then drive on. Because the battery just didn't last an entire 45-minute race or whatever. It was just a very weird thing. And then they had the capacity eventually with the next car to have a full race, and now it's I just kind of feel that Formula E has just lost its luster a little bit, and I don't know what you can do to actually fix it. I can tell you now, I certainly don't like the look of the current car. It looks very, very ugly.
It's not something that's likely to appeal to the culture we were talking about earlier, male petrol heads. It's just not going to. Look, I can see a day where the F1 car, this merged F1 E will have a vehicle that obviously has electric motors all over the place, but the battery packs themselves will be slide in and slide out in the same way that you used to slot a new battery into your old mobile phone when you needed it. So
Yes,
the pit stop will be a tyre change, and out of the side pod area will come the battery packs from underneath the floor or on top of the floor, right, but under the driver.
Yeah.
They'll slide out, slot in a new one. Same kind of thing as a refuel these days in supercars.
This is the Motor Dream Podcast.
I want to know a little bit more about what makes you tick as a car enthusiast, because there's a lot there, and there's going to be a few things I'm going to touch on, particularly when we get to the Dream Garage. So first and foremost, I want to learn, what was the first car that you drove, or the first car you owned?
First car I owned was a used 1976 Ford Escort Ghia. 1.6, 4-speed, wooden dash, cloth seats, which were pretty big back in the day. If you got a car with cloth seats, that was like, whoa, you're really posh. Because I always had issues with the vinyl seats in Australian cars because they'd melt against your skin.
They would burn you, basically.
When you go, they were awful, hideous things. And I had that little beast for, let me see, I got it when I was just about to turn 18.
Wow.
In fact, about a month before the HSC, and I remember spending a good deal of the StewVac week that they give you off to study with the aforementioned mate of mine who's deceased, whose name was Dale McIntyre, pulling that car apart, getting it ready to go away in the big end of year post-HSC trip up to the Gold Coast eventually. And yeah, I didn't do much studying, did a lot of car work. So yeah, that was my first car. It was a cracker little thing, for its time. And it cost me, I think it was about $3,000, which was a reasonable amount of money back in the day, but it was a good quality little car.
And it was a well-built car too. Like it's a shame you don't see too many of them around in their original state, but they're actually a very beautiful car for its time and very practical as well.
And for what it was, which was a small four-door sedan, it drove really well.
Yeah.
Nice little tight four-speed gearbox. Fortunately, the guy who had it before me, I assume it was a guy, had whipped off the anti-pollution gear that they used to put on cars back in the day and stuck a couple of extractors on it, which
Nice.
gave it a couple more kilowatts than it was actually rated for. And yeah, it was loads of fun. Did lots of long trips in that. Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, that's really cool. What about the first road trip you remember going on? And we're talking, and maybe the first road trip you did. Obviously, you did the HSC, but the first proper road trip that you did after you finished the HSC.
Ooh, what, here or overseas?
Both.
Gosh. Okay, in would have been the late 80s, 88. I did an 11-country European drive, which was obviously a year before the wall came down, so you were sort of restricted to Western Europe.
Yeah.
I drove around a great chunk of the UK, and sort of started in Switzerland, down into Italy, round the Mediterranean, through into France, up zigzag through France up to Paris, and then across into Belgium, the Netherlands, over into Germany, Luxembourg, and then back down to Switzerland, and then a similar kind of thing across much of southern UK. So,
That's really cool. What was the one thing what were the things that really impressed you about, like, the countryside, like the different regions of each nation you went through?
Look, they all have their own geographic differences and language differences and cultural differences. But what you find when you do a trip like that, that is a proper road trip where you're staying in motels and other sorts of accommodation, just ad hoc as you go, is people are overwhelmingly nice, irrespective of where you go. As long as you're polite and you respect the local rules. I found the people element to be surprisingly similar. They tell different stories and they do it in different accents and with different histories. But at the end of the day, I found cultural stereotypes as secondary to what people are actually like when you meet them. Perhaps the best example of that's Americans. We often have this view of Americans as this big unruly mob of disagreeing people, which they often are. But if you've been there, you know, when you go to America and you meet Americans, they're to a person lovely. So, yeah, I always do road trips everywhere I go. If I can possibly do a road trip, I will. And I've done a couple, one in the US, one in Turkey. I've driven around a good chunk of Australia. If there's a trip to be done, do it in a car.
Absolutely, I agree with that. I'm doing my first European road trip in October, so I'll be going from Belfast to Cork as part of my honeymoon with my fiancée. So that's going to be
lovely.
That'll be really cool. And
congratulations, that's excellent.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Do you remember the first time you changed a tyre?
Yes,
that's a good one.
Long before I could drive a car. Actually. Yeah. There was one day my mother, when I was quite small, used to drive a thing called, believe it or not, a Ford Prefect. Now, that'll get a chuckle out of any Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fans, but the actual car, the Ford Prefect, was the one. And it was a horrible little thing. We were down at the shopping centre one day and got back to the car, noticed that the tyre was flat, and I changed it for my mum. Yeah.
That's really was that
I was pretty little. I was only I can't remember exactly how old I was, but we got rid of that car when I was probably 7.
So that probably would have been the worst car your parents ever owned, that little Ford Prefect.
Unless you consider a Fiat 124 station wagon better.
Is that the worst car that you've owned, that Fiat?
No, my parents, mum and dad, had an interesting sort of car history, but they settled after lots of experimentation on fundamentally two brands, Volvo, which the last one they had was 30 odd years ago, and Subarus. I think we tallied up once how many Subarus we've all owned, and it was about 19 in my nuclear family.
That's fun. That's really cool. Very much not a Ford or Holden family, that's for sure.
Well, again, Dad bought this weird little car that nobody had ever heard of. He came home with this little station wagon one day, this little cream-coloured station wagon. You occasionally still see one getting around.
Yes, I do remember them.
And they had the selectable four-wheel drive, in and out. And it was just, wow, okay, what's this? How do you say that? Like, we're not quite sure how to pronounce it. It's a Subaru. No, he goes, no, Subaru, we'll call it the Subi. And I went, all right, you call it whatever you want.
And now everyone calls them Subis because there's so many of them around.
I don't know. I very much doubt that Dad was the first one to come up with that, but it was a great little car, and he went off to buy a whole bunch. And my brothers, sisters have got them. I bought one. It was just one of those car brands that kind of ran through the family.
Yeah, my sister's owned a few Subarus in her time, and she loves them. She absolutely loves them. They're a good car.
Look, they are one of the best all-rounders.
Yeah.
They might not do anything particularly fabulously compared to the competition, but when you benchmark them across, 20 different categories, 20 different features, to me, the one that wins out with the Subaru is the permanent all-wheel drive. It's just one of the great things to have in a small car. A bit more fuel usage, but for safety reasons, you can't go past it.
No, and they are a well-built car. I drove a WRX not long ago for a rally experience, and my God, they've got some poke. They really are.
Yeah. I did a rally day where I drove a WRX and a Mitsubishi Evo. I think it was the 7 from memory. Lots of fun. Highly recommend that.
They're so cool. And I've actually driven an Evo 5 Lancer as well in a road going manner, and they're so fun. They are so fun. I want to touch on a little bit about our car culture now, because we were so ensconced as a Ford and Holden nation. We obviously had a huge manufacturing industry for a very long time, and now we've lost that. We don't have that anymore. Do you think we've lost our identity as a car nation?
That's a really, really good question. I think I'd probably have to say yeah, but it's sort of gone the same. It parallels what we were talking about before, how the V8 thing has morphed into smaller, turbocharged, more efficient engines.
Yeah.
It's a similar kind of progression to that. And motorsport was like football in Australia. You had you're a Ford team or you're a Team Holden, and that was it. And these two juggernauts of the motoring world, literally, would go head to head, and the fans were polarised, and they literally hated the other guy. All of that. We'll never see those days again. They're gone. So to the extent that the Camaros and the Mustangs have sort of picked up the mantle, and that in itself is a fascinating thing to watch, and they're brilliant to go. The supercars are just insane. I mean, look at old mate the other day,
Shane Van Gisbergen, outstanding.
Not unbelievable. Totally believable. The quality of supercars racing in its modern guise is unbelievable, but it's not likely to resonate with the mob the way that the glorified high-performance taxi races once did.
Yes, I agree with that.
When Ford and Holt, they were the biggest selling vehicles for years and years and years, the big sedans and V6 guys, usually, straight 6. We're just we're not going to see that sort of thing with the Camaros and the Mustangs because they're elitist. They're sports cars. They're not something you see driving around the suburbs and parked in shopping centre car parks and that you get into the back of when you had a couple three many at the pub to get home on a Saturday night. You know, these were cars that were everyday items, and they're not now. So yeah, you're right. We have lost a car culture, but there's nobody out there really encouraging a car culture either. Anybody you see commenting on car culture these days is usually negative, unless they're a complete petrol head and easily ignored.
That's a very good answer. That I had a good chat with Jade Benham, who's now the member of Mildura in the Victorian Parliament, and she says very similar things to you. That since we no longer have a manufacturing industry building cars, it's people don't appreciate cars now as much as we did back in those halcyon days. I know we were reflecting a little bit, but you're right. It's since we've lost that. Yeah, we're a very different nation. We're a very different, I guess, group of people to those that grew up admiring and I guess appreciating cars a lot more.
Yeah, but this what I'm about to say applies to both political parties, but we have spent the past, in reality, 30 plus years exporting our manufacturing jobs overseas. Manufacturing is not really a thing like it used to be here in Australia. One of the things we discovered in the late 1930s and going into the 1940s was that we had to build a manufacturing base pretty much from scratch in order to fight World War II. Out of that came a lot of technical experience. We had a lot of machine and plant and skills. People were really highly skilled after doing this kind of work for a long time during the war effort. So it was almost a natural thing to segue much of that established workforce off into an industry that was going to produce an Australian version of what was of its time the iPhone, which was a car.
Yeah.
It made absolute sense to do it. What didn't necessarily make any sense was not to pivot the industry when it became clear that, for a whole bunch of reasons that I won't bother going into now, we were not able to compete with the big global players as a manufacturer. Had we bitten the bullet a little earlier and not just kept shoveling taxpayer money at the big three to stay, Toyota, Ford and GM, we could have been much bigger players in the niche market, building specialist gearboxes, suspension setups, safety equipment. We still could have been manufacturing things that go into the vehicle supply chain and efficiently. But we chose not to do that. Politicians are kind of binary. It's do that or do this. And you go, yeah, but hang on a sec. There's a thing in the middle you could probably have a play with too. They're not really interested in that because it doesn't suit an ideology. But yeah, I think we will live to regret the idea that we exported so much of our manufacturing base associated with the car industry overseas. Not yet, but we will.
All right, Brian. This is the reason why we got you here on the podcast, in the guise of everything that we've been talking about. I'm really excited.
It's the longest intro in history.
I know. You wake up one morning and you check your phone like everyone does, and yeah, everyone hates mobile phones, but you check it and it says check your bank balance, and you think, what's going on here? So you check your bank balance and you discover that you've become an instant billionaire, and you fall off your chair literally thinking, how the hell does this happen? You then get an email from this mystery benefactor and it says you can do whatever you like with the money. You can buy any car, bike or machine you would like, but you're only allowed to have 3 in your dream garage. So with that in mind, what is the first car, bike or machine that you would have in your dream garage, Brian Carlton?
Okay. I need to do a bit of a preamble here, otherwise
by all means,
it's not going to make a great deal of sense. We talked earlier about trying vainly to keep a low profile, other than on the radio. Okay, so I like some other people you might talk to, would be about to launch into a conversation about Paganis, about Koenigsegg's, about
I've had a few of those in my previous chats. Yes.
About Bugatti Veyrons, and all of which I would love to drive. I promise you, I would love to drive all of those cars, but I don't know that I could actually own one. I couldn't. I'd struggle driving a Veyron down to the shops to do the shopping.
Yes.
I would the flamboyance of a Pagani, the theatre of it is extraordinary. But you don't want to go to the theatre every day. Okay, so these are the cars I'm about to talk about are my everyday drives, with that caveat that anything super extravagant, like a $5 million McLaren, is not going to end up in my garage. It's just not me. Okay. And I think I probably spent more time researching and getting into this and thinking about your question than I have doing research for an interview with the Prime Minister. Because it was a difficult one. It was actually really hard to come up with only three that fulfilled all of my car needs that have changed over the years. I mentally gave myself a budget, because even if I did have $50 billion, the idea of spending any more than the amount I'm about to mention on cars, I would find obscene.
Yeah,
I'd give a huge amount of it away. I'd prefer to set up a charity to educate kids, to teach them how to read and write, than spend that super duper duper money on a car that is going to make me look like a wanker. So here is my first car. The category the use that this fulfills is shopping trips, airport pickups. You need to do some really, really light off-roading, and when I say off-roading, I'm talking about dirt roads. No,
yes.
Nothing more vigorous than a well paved dirt road. Something that is big, makes a statement, has a brutal engine, and can happily seat 5 people and a whole bunch of luggage on a ski trip.
Yeah.
And that is this, an Audi RS Q8.
Oh, I actually like that. An Audi RS Q8. I'm going to bring that. Tell us a bit about it.
Now, go with me here.
Yes.
It is the twin under the skin to the Lamborghini Urus, which is $150,000 or $60,000 more than the Audi. It's also a twin under the skin to the Porsche Cayenne, which I just don't like the look of for some reason. To me, a Porsche is not an SUV, but an Audi is. Now, I've owned an Audi, and so I've got a bit of an emotional attachment there. I had an old A4 1.8 turbo back in 1998. And this thing with a 4-litre V8 twin turbo, 4-wheel driving, 4-wheel steer, it looks like something out of a brutalist bar house session in Germany in the 1930s. And it's also the kind of last hurrah for V8s. But for getting people and stuff around, that would do me very nicely at around about 300K.
That is so. I'm looking at it now, and it fits the purpose of being a practical car, that it has that high performance capability, and the fact that it lapped the Nürburgring as an SUV with a time of 7 minutes 42 seconds, which is faster than an R8 of all things, which is a V10 sports car, and anyone that knows an R8 knows how quick those things are. I mean, that's just impressive. It's a cool car.
So that's my first one. Now, as I say, for $480,000 or thereabouts, you can get into a Lamborghini Urus, which is a lovely looking thing. But again, like the Porsche, a Lamborghini to me is something that looks like a Huracan.
I actually don't like it. I'm
not a fan either. So
as much as I love Lamborghinis, I don't like it. It just looks
wrong.
I remember Peter Brock, the late Peter Brock. He said, when you look at proportions of a car, if it looks right, it looks good. But then when you look at another car that might be, say, you might be at a car show and you see another one that looks completely butt ugly, and he says that the proportions on that car just weren't right. And I think in this instance, the Urus, there's a lot wrong with that.
There's a guy who has an RSQ8 who lives down the street, and you see it parked around every now and again in a matte dark grey that looks fantastic. It's just like, whoa, okay. Now that's number one. The second and third are there by default of a couple of requirements that I have.
Sure.
My most recent purchase, and it was done largely as a way to, I don't know, sort of the thing about the COVID lockdown is that it was so very intense and so very long.
Yeah.
And when you go from your house to the radio studio and there's nobody else there, right? Do the show, go home, can't do anything, go out anywhere, and you are locked into this sort of 17-hour-a-day COVID cycle. The world starts to close in on you a little bit. And recognizing that in myself, I thought that when I needed to buy a new car when I left there, because I had a company car, I wanted to get a convertible. Now, you can go, Spoonie's having a midlife crisis, right? That's okay. I'm fine. I'm good with that. But the idea of just a million miles of sky, no matter what sort of car it was, I didn't really care that much. It just needed to have an open top. Living in Hobart at the time, there were two vehicles other than used Mercs for $60,000 or whatever, which are way out of my price range. I've just left my job, remember? So I go, budget car, what am I going to get? Anyway, there were two convertibles available, one of which was sold minutes before I went and had a look at it in the dealership. And the second one was the one I bought, and that's a Volvo C70 T5. It's got a hard top folding roof, so it's a coupe, two-door. And it was, because it's a 2014 model, Volvo was still heavily involved in supercars at the time.
That's
so the
right.
T5 version, which is the 2.5 litre 5-cylinder turbo,
yes,
it has got nice fat wheels, beautiful wheels. It's got lowered suspension. It's got bigger brakes. It's just got a few little bits and pieces that make it look a lot tougher and meaner than the average Volvo C70 did in any guise. It has a quite. It's almost like the people at Volvo at the time rang up some dude at IKEA and said, "Hey, listen, can you send over your best folding and packing guy to design our roof for us? Because the way the roof works is extraordinary." But it is a full 4-seater, two-door coupe with a proper metal folding roof, and I bloody love it. And I mean, I seriously love it. I haven't felt this way about a car since probably my old Saab 900 Turbo back in the day.
I have a feeling you want to have the Saab in the garage. I'll allow you for that. So we'll come back to that.
No, we'll come back to that. Okay, so one of my requirements in my garage is a convertible.
Yes.
Now, being a finicky bugger, which I am, it can't be a soft top.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong being finicky.
Okay, well, yes, but there is, because there is quite literally one folding hardtop vehicle on the market in Australia today. Count it, one. And that's on my list, which is the Porsche 911 Targa 4S.
The
Has
Porsche.
to be the S version. A Porsche. Yep.
Okay, you've basically lost Jeremy Clarkson's approval there. Cause...
I don't care. No, because I understand what Hammond was banging on about all those years ago when he talks about the engagement with the car. And given what we've been talking about over the course of the past hour or so, is that this disengagement from driving. I want to feel engaged. I want to feel like I'm driving the car and it's not randomly abusing me, having assumed, like most modern cars do, that I'm not able to drive the thing and I need constant instruction as to what I'm doing. For example, the Mazda CX-5 company car that I had prior to getting the Volvo, every time you put it in reverse, it beeped at you. Now, that was beyond the beeping that happens when you're about to reverse into something. This is, oh, you've just engaged reverse gear. Yeah, I know, I just did it myself. I'm not an idiot. I know when I put it in, it stopped beeping at me. The thing that drives me nuts, and one of the reasons I didn't spend the same coin on a new car for the Volvo, was because I was sick of the bloody thing beeping and yelling at me all the time. I don't like cars that try and drive you out of the lane when you want to cross the lane and pull you back in. I hate all that intrusive driver technology because the car maker is assuming that the driver is an idiot. And I don't like being treated like people thinking I'm an idiot, because I'm not when it comes to cars, not. So that engagement thing, really important. So we're talking about a 3-litre flat six, twin turbo, 353 kilowatts, 570 newton meters, 4-wheel drive with a folding glass Targa roof.
Stop it. Stop it.
Have a look at it. Now, come on, have a look at the picture of the thing. Let me get it up here. Look at that.
Oh,
look at that.
That I have to say, I look at that, and that is actually pretty cool. If there's a Porsche that I would own, it might be that, because of the glass roof. That is
that's the sole reason. Now,
nice.
Which brings me on to my third car.
All right.
One of the things to me that is the most engaging part of driving a car in a not fast, but in an energetic manner.
Yes.
Manner is the dance that your feet does on the pedals when they're driving a stick shift, a manual. And my third car, and again, this was really difficult because there are so few on the market that met the criteria.
Yes.
Has to be a 6-speed manual with a clutch.
Yes.
Right, 3 pedals. I want to do the dance again. I haven't done the dance since I sold my Subaru Liberty, which was in, God, I don't know, 2010. So it's been 13 years since I've really driven a manual, and I miss it.
I miss it too. I've got. Before you go on, you mentioned the Volvo before because it's got the T5, the 5-cylinder 2.5 litre turbo. I owned a Ford Focus XR5, and I still have the car. It's in my garage.
Dog, basically.
It's the same dog, and it is a beautiful engine. It is the most best engine I've ever felt in terms of power, in terms of torque. I still have the car because I'm going to turn it into a track car. And I've been meaning to do it for a while.
Nice.
But it's just there's something about having 3 pedals, that turbocharged engine, that 5-cylinder and everything. It's just that sound. Yeah, I get it. I totally understand.
Okay, so here, after much pondering, considering alternatives, of which there's a decreasing number, because people just don't make manual gearboxes anymore. Let's put it this way. There are other manufacturers whose cars I would have had in this section, now the third one, if they made a manual. But you can't get one, not even as an option on a lot of cars these days. And it's really, really sad. So at the risk of being unbelievably boring, my third is a Porsche 718 Cayman S with a 6-speed manual gearbox. That 2.5 litre turbo 4, flat 4, 257 kilowatts, 420 newton meters with a 6-speed gearbox. That's all you need. Any faster than that, and it becomes stupid on a road. And I love the mid-engine, rear drive, really just the essence of motor car. Properly balanced, and that gorgeous drivability that Porsches are renowned for, with a 6-speed gearbox and coming in at less than 200k option, the way I like it. You gotta like that.
I don't mind it. I mean, it does have that 911 look about it as well, but it has that roadster feel about it also, and it's a pure manual. I mean, you don't get to see too many manuals available brand new these days.
No, that's right.
They're few and far between.
Right. Look, the third one would have been completely different had I been able to get the 911 with a manual box. You can't get it.
Because they're all paddle shifts now.
Flappy paddle, which are terrific. I've had one before and they're great. But when it comes to that pure organic connection to the car, you cannot beat a 6-speed manual gearbox. And
I agree.
Seeing as though we're talking about the last hurrah of the internal combustion engine and gearboxes of any kind, because electric cars, as you know, mostly don't have them, I want to be as purist as I possibly can on the way out. I'm not getting any younger, and if I had the money, so I've just done the rough numbers here. So you're looking at 300k for the Audi thereabouts, 400 for the 911, and 200 for the 718, which is a total of 900 if my maths is correct, which leaves me 100k under my $1 million mark for any extra options that I've missed or whatever.
Oh,
So
look, I have to say, you've chosen well, and I'm going to allow it. Normally, the 3-car limit, I'm going to extend to 4 for this one because
no, you don't have to. You don't have to. I've covered everything off there that I need.
Okay. Well, I was going to say I was going to include the C70 Volvo, the T5, but if you insist,
See, that's already there. So,
yeah. All right.
Would I sell it? No, I'd probably hide it up the back of the garage under a tarp so you didn't know I still had it, right?
Nice.
and pretend that these are the 3 that I would drive. Look, to be perfectly fair, the Volvo would be a bit redundant. If I've got a choice, I want to do some top-down driving. Am I going to jump in the Volvo C70 T5 or am I going to jump in the Porsche 911 Targa 4S?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a bit of a no-brainer.
It's a no-brainer, yeah.
If you've to the viewers, if you've never been in a convertible, if you've never done top-down driving before, give it a crack. It's one of the great experiences. It's fabulous.
I love the list. I absolutely love the list. I do want to touch on just quickly before we wrap up
Sure.
the Saab
Yep.
900 that you spoke so passionately about before.
Yep.
I'm surprised that's not on the list, but you actually like the Saab. So tell us what made you fall in love with that particular car back in the day.
It was quirky. It wasn't the same as all the other cars that were around. It had a punchy 2-litre turbo engine, which from memory was producing something like 136 kilowatts, which for a car that came in at sub 1,300 kilograms, right? They weren't that heavy. Cars back in those days weren't very heavy. They were quite light.
Yeah.
So that combination with a reasonably nice 5-speed gearbox, unbelievable brakes, and a good set of Pirellis, I could sleep in the back of it by folding the rear seat down. And I'm 6'1", so I'm a pretty big guy. And there was room enough to sleep in the back, so great for ski trips. It had a sunroof and great seats, and it was just a really, really well put together car. The reason they went broke is because they were so wildly over-engineered that every car was being sold at a loss, which is why they eventually went belly up. But one of the great cars. You either love Saabs or you don't. And if you lived with one for a while and it was your daily drive, they just get under your skin. There's something about it. Any Saab driver listening to me who's ever owned a Saab will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And there's just something about them.
I think that the one Saab I actually really liked was the 9000 CWS from the early.
Yep.
They were a nice car. They looked nice too.
Lovely car. Look, you're talking about a guy here who, apart from owning the aforementioned Audi, also had an Alfa Romeo 156. So I have owned enough nice-ish cars, European cars, to make a judgment that for its time, and mine was a 1986 900 turbo, it was why would you buy anything else? It's like people who drive a Golf these days.
Yeah.
They drive their Golf around and it sits 5 people and takes all the shopping, and they can go away on a nice trip, or you get it onto a back road and it handles well enough and feels nice and solid and well built, all of those kind of things. The Saab was the same back in the day when cars weren't genuinely like that, for the most part.
That's a cool way to end this chat. It's been so enjoyable, and I love the garage. The Audi RS Q8, the Porsche 911 Targa 4S, and the 718 Cayman-S. That's
with a manual gearbox.
With a manual
Very
gearbox.
important.
Let's
got to have the 6-speed manual.
Yes, I love that. I think that's a really cool garage, and I certainly like it. It's certainly different, out of the ordinary, and I absolutely approve of it 100%.
Good on you, buddy. Thank you. I was worried about offending you because he's going to want to sit there on his computer and Google images of a Pagani Zonda or something like that, which are fabulous. But I couldn't possibly justify to myself spending that kind of coin on a car. So having come out of your challenge with all the cars that I want for less than $1 million, I'm happy with that.
No, well, look, we've had a few people, one guest in particular who used to work for Triple M back in the late 90s. You may know of her, Philippa Gawana. She used to be the original gig picklet, actually. One of her cars in her garage was her grandfather's Holden HQ Ute. So
Fabulous.
It's, you don't have to be have a supercar or whatever in that dream garage. It's just something that resonates with you, and that's what it's all about. Well, it's to conjure up the interest of what car you would really like, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a supercar.
Oh, look, and if I was able to extend the 3 into a couple of older things that I'd have, would I like to have a brand new showroom condition 1986 Saab 900 Turbo? Hell yeah!
I knew you would. Yeah.
Hell yeah! And of all the cars I've had, that would probably be the only one that I'd want to resuscitate like that. With the possible exception of the Volvo, which I'm increasingly falling for. You develop a relationship with some cars and you don't with others. If you've ever driven a Toyota Corolla, you know how hard it is to form a relationship with something like that.
Yes.
The Volvo is lulling me into this sort of weird love affair that I wasn't aware I'd ever have with a Volvo of any kind. But it is a genuinely beautiful car, and we've developed quite a good relationship, and I like it a lot. But if I had to go out to dealers tomorrow and buy new cars, the 3 that I've given you are the ones I'd buy.
And on that note, that's a perfect way to end the chat. Brian, thank you so much, and I hope you keep enjoying your love of cars moving forward, and hopefully we get to hear your dulcet tones back on the airwaves in the near future. I know you've come back onto the airwaves in Canberra recently, but hopefully we get to hear you around Australia at some point. And congratulations on your career as well. I've listened to you over the years, and I'm a bit of a fan, so it's been great to have a chat.
Well, it's been a great pleasure, mate. Thank you for asking me. I don't often get asked to do these kind of things, but I am happy to play when it happens. And because you touched on a subject that's so, I don't know, close to my life, every aspect of my life has been about cars in one way or another. Thank you for the opportunity. It's been huge fun.
Well, that was a conversation I really enjoyed immensely with a man who is very modest, not only with his own career, but also his love of cars and motoring. His dream garage was also the perfect mix of practical as well as aspirational. And for a man that loves his Saabs, he's definitely not your typical motoring enthusiast that just loved a Ford or Holden and nothing else. As someone that has admired his talents on air in the recent past, it was a great joy to chat about cars with him, and I thank Brian for his generosity and time to appear on the show. If you're based in Canberra, you can listen to him on 2CC by tuning into 1206 on the AM band or via DAB digital radio. You can also follow Carlton on Twitter/X at SpoonieMan. Speaking of socials, we're on all the channels, and our handle is The Motor Dream, which is also the hashtag. Head to the Motor Dream podcast website at themotordream.com.au, and that is where you can also find previous episodes, as well as show information and links to our socials. And make sure you like and subscribe to wherever you listen to your podcasts, and leave some feedback as well, be it a quirky car question or a guest suggestion. That's it for this episode, and thank you for listening as always. I'm Connor McNally, and remember, please drive safely on the roads. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Motor Dream podcast. This series is proudly produced by Beast Productions.